Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Davidson, and in this podcast, we'll explore the art and science of negotiation in real-world situations. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, asking for a raise, or trying to resolve a conflict with a colleague or loved one, negotiation is an essential skill that can help you achieve your goals and build better relationships. Through interviews with experts, real-life stories, and practical tips and techniques, we'll deep dive into the strategies and tactics that can make you a better negotiator. From understanding your own negotiation style, to reading body language, handling difficult conversations, and overcoming common challenges, this podcast will give you the tools you need to negotiate with confidence and achieve your objectives. So whether you're a seasoned negotiator looking to refine your skills, or someone who's new to the game, join us as we explore the world of negotiation in real life. In this episode of Negotiation in Real Life, I speak with John Pabon, founder of Fulcrum Strategic Advisors. John has spent 2 decades in the business of saving our Earth. After leaving his role at the United Nations, John travelled the world studying the impacts of sustainability firsthand in factories, on fields, and at Fortune 500s. He is an expert in sustainability with a mission to move sustainability from theory to practical strategies that help people and businesses confidentially make real impact. To get there, he shares his message through books, consulting to businesses, and keynote speaking to audiences around the world. John's global career has taken him from Los Angeles to New York, Shanghai to Seoul to Melbourne. He's had the privilege of working with the United Nations, McKinsey, AC Nielsen, and as a consultant with BSR, the world's largest sustainability-focused business network. A decade of experience living and working in Asia inspired him to found Fulcrum Strategic Advisors with a mission to help companies, governments, and individuals capitalise on the benefits sustainability offers. He is a regular contributor to major publications and speaks to an array of global audiences on issues of sustainability, geopolitics, communications, and societal change. John is the chair of the Conference Board's Asia Sustainability Leaders Council, a member of the United Nations Association of Australia, and serves on the Board of Advisors to the US Green Chamber of Commerce. He is the author of Sustainability for the Rest of Us, Your No Bullshit 5-Point Plan for Saving the Planet. His upcoming book, The Great Greenwashing, will be out in May. In our discussion today, we speak about negotiating in the context of varied interests of multiple parties, the importance of aligning your desired outcomes with the interests of your counterparts, developing sustainability outcomes by focusing on the business imperatives, the importance of stakeholder engagement, communication as the critical element for achieving sustainability changes, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy listening to today's episode of Negotiation in Real Life. Good morning and welcome to Negotiation in Real Life, John.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. So, John, I thought it would be a great way to start the podcast by asking you to tell our listeners a bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'll give the elevator pitch, then I'll go into more detail with the fun stuff.
I love it.
I am a sustainability author, consultant, and speaker. I've been in this space for about 20 years now. After I left my role at the United Nations, I decided to really study sustainability firsthand. So working around the world, on farms, in factories, in boardrooms, to really get to the nitty-gritty of what sustainability is. That's the pitch. Let's talk about what it means.
Yeah, what does it actually mean? We love it.
Yeah, so I think it's important to back up a step and just make sure we're at the same understanding of defining sustainability, because if you ask 5 people, you're going to get 100 different answers. So for me, sustainability really is a catch-all term. I know a lot of times we think, okay, sustainability equals environment. Hugging the trees, saving the polar bears, amazing, but that's only one small part of what we do in sustainability. We cover everything from that to corporate ethics, governance, transparency, human rights, labor rights, animal rights. All of that stuff is wrapped up in sustainability. So as much as I hate to say this phrase, it is really wrapped up in the DNA of a business, because sustainability touches every single part of an organization, and even at an individual level. You know, it does touch every little piece
So
of our
it's
lives.
making sure that all of the policies and the processes and the procedures of the business are things that have longevity and allow all of the people and all of the parts of that to succeed.
Absolutely. That's the boring stuff, but it's the stuff that I like. That's the area
Yeah.
of the sustainability universe I'm in. So the governance side. So we typically use an acronym ESG, which encapsulates sustainability. So E for environment, all that stuff. S for the social stuff, so labor rights, human rights, but the G, the governance side. So like you were mentioning, the transparency, the monitoring, the governance of it all
Yeah.
to make sure it's happening.
Fantastic. Because I think that term ESG gets used a lot. And I think there's probably a lot of listeners out there who wouldn't, would have heard it and going, what is ESG? So I think that's really helpful. I'm interested too. You said you came to sustainability from the UN. What were you doing at the UN?
Yeah, so I had a few different roles at the UN, and I think so everybody understands most people there are generalists. We do have a few specialists here and there around the world, but most of the time they expect you to sort of put your feet in and sink or swim. So they throw you around where they need you, and you learn really, really quickly. So I'm a trained generalist, which is great. So what I was doing there is a few different capacities, working on behalf of the UN, representing them in different roles. So one was on nuclear disarmament. I'm not a nuclear disarmer. I'm not a scientist. One was on decolonization, another on post-conflict peace building. So those were the three big roles that I had, and then a little foray into counterterrorism before I left.
Just a lighthearted topic to finish off with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I love the idea of peace building. Obviously, I describe myself as a business peacekeeper. So this idea about peacekeeping and that fits nicely with the whole negotiation piece. And obviously, we're here to talk about negotiation today. Before we get into talking about negotiation in a sustainability context, one of the things I really kind of pick up often is that most of us have jobs that require us to negotiate all the time. Very, very few of us are ever taught how to negotiate. So I'm wondering if there's an example of a negotiation that you've had perhaps earlier on in your career that's really stood out as something that's been a defining moment in how you approach negotiations going forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that it doesn't matter if it's at the UN or at the state level, or, even if you're talking to your partner, there's always negotiation. Negotiation is
Absolutely.
happening every minute of every day, and it's applicable. So the lessons in something I might have been doing at the UN are as applicable to figuring out what you're going to go, what restaurant you're going to go to for dinner. So it all works out. And I think a lot of people, if you had to, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, if you had to pick a book of the how to of negotiation, you're gonna talk about getting to yes and sort of the 6 rules of how to do that. And I'm sure you've heard that a million times, but it's actually true.
I
And
teach
even
this stuff. I love it.
and even if you may not have read the book, you're probably executing this stuff in your day-to-day life. So if I had to think about one of my biggest pieces of negotiation at the UN, and probably the one that is maybe the most meaningful to me as well, because at the end of the day, it is an organization trying to change the world,
Yeah.
bits and pieces. So it was probably halfway through my career there, and looking at post-conflict sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeeping personnel. So it's a very long title to basically say a resolution to stop peacekeepers from sexually abusing the populations they're supposed to protect. A very pervasive issue. My master's thesis is actually in that, so it linked up quite well.
Yeah.
But it becomes quite difficult. So on the surface, this seems like something that everybody could get behind. In reality, when you're trying to negotiate 192 different countries with very different views of the world, it becomes very tricky.
Yes.
And especially when you have different blocks, for example, the block led by the Vatican or the block led by the Arab states, it becomes a totally different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the most meaningful pieces of work that I did. And we did end up at a resolution to get somewhere with this, and I don't know where they've taken it since, but just getting to the resolution is a step in the right direction. And I suppose the question of how we did that is also quite important, and it really comes down to understanding what the other person is saying. I think I'm a big believer in that, not just understanding the audience, but really understanding what they're doing, where they're coming from, and what they're actually saying to you. And there are always red lines that one can't cross. And as unfortunate as it is in a topic like what we're talking about now, it's you can't. So you take that as your reality, your baseline, and you move on from there instead of trying to push junk uphill to
Yep.
try to get to a resolution. And it was the same in this context, really understanding that some states could not support X, Y, or Z language, and moving on from there. And it maybe does get to a result that's quite watered down from what one would originally like, but
Yep.
at the end of the day, it is the step in the right direction, the moving the needle. That's the important part, not
Yeah.
necessarily getting every single thing that you wanted.
Yeah, I love that. And, that's the thing, isn't it? Keeping on negotiating for the sake of getting to an outcome when an analysis shows you I'm not going to get there and I understand why I'm not going to get there. Often when I'm working with people in negotiations, the outcome we get to is it's time to move on and think of a different strategy. So
Absolutely.
really, really interesting. So let's move then and talk a little bit about sustainability in negotiation, because I think particularly when we first spoke, I thought, sustainability and negotiation, how are those two going to go together? Of course they do, because there's so much influencing that needs to happen to get that change that we're all looking for. What's been your experience of negotiations in sustainability?
Absolutely. So when we think about, at least from my part of the world, really getting in to the executive level to try to find the people that are going to champion this, to finance it, and certainly to sign it off within an organization. Those are the people that I deal with day in and day out. And even though this is very much a topic that people are passionate about, getting it across the line in a business context is very, very difficult because
Mm,
there are so many competing interests of other things that right now need to be done. And when you think about a business context, the people that are reportable to boards, they're reportable on quarter by quarter metrics. Sustainability is not measured quarter by quarter. So to try to get them over the line with something that is extremely long term, when they're more worried
yes.
about their head on the chopping block every 3 months, is also an issue. So if we back up and think about how this is normally done, and this is not the way I advocate for negotiating sustainability, it's very much led by the heart. It's very altruistic. It's very, let's save this group and let's do this thing and let's have a recycling program. And that's all well and good, but that's not speaking the language of business. And that needs
Yeah.
to be our starting point. So, really understanding that there needs to be a marriage between discussing sustainability in a business context and doing good. So, I would call myself a very pragmatic altruist. So, really doing the right thing, but doing it in a strategic, pragmatic manner. So, how does one do that? So, if you're going to the CMO or the CEO or even the CEO of an organization trying to convince them about sustainability, you need to really, again, speak their language and understand what they care most about. They probably don't care about hugging the trees. That's fine. They care about the bottom line. So, how are you going to help them achieve the goals they're trying to achieve is a really important starting point.
Yeah, and I
So,
love it because
not
even if they care about hugging the trees, it's not what they're measured on.
that's exactly
So
it.
they're going to, they'll probably put those corporate goals ahead of their own individual goals to a certain extent.
Absolutely. So, really understanding that, like we were talking about a minute ago, their language, what's in it for them, and what they're trying to get out of this negotiation is super important. So, my goal and my struggle is to help businesses understand that sustainability is not necessarily just a feel good thing. It just makes perfect business sense.
Mm.
An organization that is sustainable, we've found out and we understand through a lot of case studies, they outperform the market. They have happier employees, more productive employees, lower turnover. The list goes on of why a sustainable organization is a better organization overall. And plus, just from a reputational standpoint, if you're not a sustainable organization today, you're probably not going to be around much longer because consumers aren't going to put up with it. So entering these negotiations with these business leaders and trying to explain things in their language is foundational for getting anywhere with sustainability.
Yeah. So have you got some examples, and obviously not naming organizations, but what are some specific examples of how you've been able to do that and convert that language into the corporate speak?
My favorite example, and I'm happy to name them because I work with them So it's fine. It's Walmart. And I know when people hear
Mm.
Walmart, they think, oh, Satan incarnate, great. And you know what? They don't get a pass on everything. They do a lot of bad things, but one thing they do quite well is they care about their workers in the developing world.
Mhm.
So when I lived in Shanghai, I lived and worked there for a decade. I worked with Walmart as a consultant to help them create female empowerment programs in their 60-ish factories across China. And this is something a lot of companies were doing at the time. This is around 2015, where they will go in and they'll try to upskill workers, not necessarily on the job stuff that, you know, the technical things, but more the soft skills. So communications, family planning, even career management, these sort of things that somebody probably didn't learn in school
Yeah.
or would otherwise have never learned. So these programs are going on, but the question is, okay, if I'm trying to sell this in, maybe not to one of the Waltons, obviously, not them, but you know, somebody in middle management, how am I going to do that? Why should they care about these programs that are essentially going to take women off the line to teach them and then you know, take up space from the factory. So how we went into these discussions, these negotiations is, again, we talked about it in their language. So, and I'll use this example, and a lot of people may find it crass, so apologies in advance. But in China, abortion is considered a form of contraception.
Yeah.
And so if you have a large part of your workforce out at any one time, either having a procedure or recovering from a procedure, they're when they do come back to work, if they come back to work, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to be super healthy, and they're probably not going to be productive. Now, turn that on its head, and you go in with a program that teaches other options for women.
Yes.
So they will now ideally understand that they don't need to have an abortion. So they will be at work more often. They're probably a lot healthier. They're probably happier, and they're certainly more productive. So absenteeism goes down. Return rates go up, and the overall impression we found is that these workers now understand the factory and the business cares for them, so then they give
Yes.
back to the factory. And that's how you discuss these things with especially middle managers who tend to be in the way more than others, to
Well,
help them understand
there's
this goes to your bottom line.
Yeah, and there's two things that come out of that story for me. So one is obviously selling the benefits, but it's also about raising their awareness of what the cost is, because I'm going to imagine that until you came in there and pointed out the statistics around how much time was being lost because of these abortions, how much productivity was being lost on the women's return, the middle managers quite possibly were unaware of that and hadn't quantified it. So coming into that negotiation, it's about both sides. You know, do you even realize you have a problem? Because it's really hard to get movement from someone if they don't believe they've got a problem. And I love that you've actually highlighted to them, whether you knew it or not, guys, you've got a problem.
Absolutely, that's exactly right.
Do you ever feel stuck in a negotiation or conflict? You're not quite sure what the next step should be? Friends and colleagues may give advice, but perhaps they're only seeing things from your side. My new negotiation GP service is for exactly that situation. You can book a short, standard or long consultation where we will explore your situation using a systematic approach. You will walk away with concrete steps to follow and an increased confidence to manage the situation. To learn more, head to my website at nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au, where you can book a consultation online. Don't forget, I also offer one-on-one coaching, team training, and expert advice on specific negotiations. My tailored approach is designed to meet your specific needs, and my proven methodologies and strategies are grounded in the latest research and best practices. So whether you're a small business owner, a corporate executive, or anyone in between, let me help you achieve your negotiation goals and maximize your success. And so in general, so you're consulting now to organizations who are trying to implement sustainability. Obviously, there are organizations who might not be large enough to bring someone like yourself in. What are your tips for how people can get some of these initiatives in? I mean, and I might be even talking about small businesses where it might be a business owner, and then some of the employees might be wanting to push in some programs or some ideas that they've got for sustainability. What are your top tips for people to do so?
The first thing a business needs to understand, and it doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 100 or just getting started, is you need to understand what your material issues are. You need to understand what is most important to the business. And sustainability, as a consultant, we've sort of stolen this idea from the finance world of material risk and issue, where we'll go out and we'll interview internal stakeholders, external stakeholders to understand what they want from the business. And this is just good marketing. This is marketing 101, to understand that, these are our top three issues that we need to be addressing, not these 50 different other things that may not be so important, because as we know, when you try to do everything, you don't do anything at
Yeah.
all. And that's what happens in sustainability. People come to this with this notion of, oh, I have all this stuff to do, I need to play catch up, or everybody's watching me and I need to be pushing the needle. And that's not the case. Focus on
Yeah.
what is most important, and
Well,
really stay laser focused on that.
and I love it. Focus on what you know is most important, because you've talked to people, not to what you feel like they're thinking is important or what you assume they think is important, because
Stakeholder
they're
engagement.
often very different, aren't they?
Absolutely. They always are quite different, especially in a startup environment. So that's rule number one. And just really sticking to that and understanding that as well, being transparent with what you're doing is only a benefit. I know that a lot of companies are very hesitant to be transparent with things, especially when it comes to hard numbers, because they're worried about backlash. But you have to start somewhere. So you do need to be gathering this data. You need to be publishing it, and it keeps you accountable. It sets a benchmark, and it also encourages action on the part of the business to ideally progress in a positive way.
Yeah, fantastic. So that sort of stakeholder engagement and understanding people is important. The measurement and the accountability is important. Is there anything else that is critical to getting success in these sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, I think it really does go back to that communication aspect, and really how you're communicating, what you're communicating, and certainly why you're communicating these things. Is it because you are trying to position your business as a green business when you may not be? That's a very dangerous sort of environment to
So,
be in.
so authenticity is also important then.
Absolutely. Authenticity is super important. And I like to tell people I work with or people I talk to that consumers don't expect you to be perfect. They just expect you not to lie to them. That's sort of foundational. They don't want you lying. And I think a really good example, if I think back to, I don't remember what awards season it was, but or even what award it was, but maybe it was the Oscars, when Warren Beatty got up and he gave the Oscar for Picture of the Year, but they opened the envelope and it was the wrong winner that they announced.
Yeah.
This would have been a few years ago, and I think it's PwC does all of the accounting, and they stuffed the envelopes and they did it wrong, and they owned up for it almost immediately, and the thing
Yes.
sort of got swept under the rug. No big deal, no harm, no foul. It's when you start to, as we're seeing certainly over the past few weeks in the financial sector, it's when you start to lie and obfuscate and dive into unethical behavior, is when people have a problem.
Absolutely. It's like I'm always saying to my kids, I don't mind. Well, I do mind, but I get a certain degree of angry about you doing the wrong thing. I get a huge amount of angry if you lie to me about having done it.
Absolutely. That's right.
I'm not stupid. The general public is not stupid in some of these other things. So I think that's right, isn't it? Taking responsibility as an organization is part of that process.
And we've seen that as the starting point for a lot of businesses to enter their sustainability journey. If you think back to, was it the late 80s when Nike found out they had child labor in their factories? It was the oh crap moment, we better do something. And for me, I suppose the ends justify the means. Whatever gets a company started on that sustainability journey is great. If they've lied to get to that starting point, that's fine. But just fix what you're doing and be transparent about what it is.
Yeah. If you could see one thing change in the sustainability space, what would that be?
Oh, it all comes down to comms, 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 comms. Every day I'm talking about comms and how we approach this, and how we talk about what we're trying to talk about. And one of my biggest headaches is this activist notion of approaching sustainability, this throw tomato soup on a Van Gogh or glue your face to the cement, as being a way to increase knowledge of what we're trying to do. And that is the exact wrong approach, because at the end of the day, our goal now is no longer to increase awareness. People know. Our
Yeah.
goal now is to increase conversion. So we're trying to bring people on side. So the more you have people doing these really crazy antics, not really representing what sustainability is, starting from points that are not realistic, like assuming everybody wants to go live off the grid or give up international travel. I'm not giving up my trips to Bali or Thailand. No way. So, and I work in this field. So our starting point, our reality is now today. So where do we go from here? And that's a message that's not really communicated as well, because the people that, and I'm painting with very broad strokes, are doing the least tend to be the ones that are the loudest.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And I guess it's that perspective that what happens is when they're the ones that are being heard and they're being unreasonable or overly demanding, it sets this sort of conversation that is never going to get to a resolution, and it muddies the waters for the others. Do you see any
So
solutions to that?
yeah, there's lots of solutions, and I think and we'll wax poetic for a second, and altruistic is this getting away from this idea of doomism, that the die is cast, there's nothing we can do. And this goes back to marketing, where for the past 40 years we've had the same image of sustainability marketing. It's the dystopian future, it's the polar bear on the ice cap, all these really sad messages that if you're a normal human being watching TV, you're one of 8 billion people, you kind of sit back and go, okay, well, what am I supposed to do about all that? I might as well do nothing. And that's been capitalized on by forces that might want to work against us, where doomism has really set in, that there is no hope, that just forget it. And that's what big companies that are probably doing really bad things want us to believe. So I would certainly encourage listeners to not fall into that idea that we're all screwed, because it's not true. So I would certainly recommend, as a starting point, really understanding that, and I talk about this a lot, you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. There
Yeah.
are plenty of people in the world that are doing good things. So I would encourage everyone to really pick the one thing they're either most passionate about, they have a specialty in, or if you're financially well off, congratulations, you can give money to, because those all help. And really pick and stay with that one certain thing, understanding that there will be others that will pick up where you might not be able to.
Yeah, I like that, isn't it? And I think it takes the pressure because when you hear about sustainability all the time, you can start to feel incredibly guilty about all sorts of things, and a life lived with a lot of guilt for something that in reality you probably can't do too much about these days. Because and look, I'm a bit of a, I don't know if you've watched it. Have you watched The Good Place on Netflix?
Yes.
And I love it because they talk about, this fact that everything that we do these days has unintended consequences, and it's impossible to live a good life because, you pick a tomato and it's got, carbon footprint and migrant workers and all sorts of things. And if we were to try and address everything, as you said, it would be too much. And that's where I think your advice to just limit something and make something where it's easier to do something about it if it's something you care about. And if you can pick something you care about that's going to have a good impact, then that's a lovely place to go. Actually, I can lie in my bed and sleep at night because I've done something positive, and I'm helping to make a difference.
Absolutely. And you can see the linkages there with business, right? It all ties together, the personal and the business, where you pick your lane, you pick your thing, and you focus on it. And you did touch on a very good point of this notion of the perfect environmentalist or the perfect altruist. There's no such thing. None of us are perfect. And I think especially those in the activist community do push this idea that you need to be perfect, and that's not
Yeah.
realistic. So
Well,
don't feel guilt.
spreading chemical paints on property. It's like, hang on, you've just put chemicals in the world.
Exactly. It's very
Do you
much do as I
recommend this?
say,
Do you
not as I
recommend
do.
this? I know. So, look, John, I reckon I could keep talking for ages about this because I think sustainability is a really important topic. So, I'm really glad to have had you on the podcast.
Thank
For
you.
people who want to learn more or perhaps pick your ear about this and get some advice, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Absolutely. So the easiest way is through my website, johnpabon.com. I have one book that's currently out, Sustainability for the Rest of Us. That book is a really practical guide for people that includes some of the points we talked about today of really being more sustainable in your day-to-day life. And I currently have a book out, depending on when the podcast goes live, that's currently in pre-sale, called The Great Greenwashing. It'll be out the end of May. That's all about one of the hottest topics in sustainability, how corporations, governments, and influencers are lying to you.
Oh, I'm going to keep an eye out for that one. Once again, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, John.
Thanks so much.
That's all for this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new that you can apply in your own negotiations. Remember, negotiation is a skill that can be developed and refined over time, so keep practicing and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media or email us directly. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps us to reach more people and continue to produce high-quality content. Until next time, keep negotiating in real life.